Hey guys, Caleb here, and in this video we're going to be talking about a very interesting camera that was just announced from Sigma. They've made cameras in the past, but I've never really been interested in them because they're primarily stills cameras. But this new one that was just announced, the Sigma FP, is really impressive from a filmmaker or video producer's perspective. So in short, the Sigma RP is a tiny full frame 24 megapixel camera, and this thing really is really small. For video specs, you'll want to be sitting down because this camera can shoot at, I don't know, 8, 10, and 12-bit RAW in Cinema DNG externally, which is just bonkers. And that is at up to 4K UHD. Now, I think this is mainly going to be external recording given the size of this tiny camera, but a lot of blog posts and articles I was finding about this camera seem to be somewhat confused as to whether it's internal or external and what the exact specs are. But we do know this camera will definitely have all-eye and long GOP H.265 recording internally, so very similar to a lot of the cameras we have at this moment. And when it comes to resolutions and frame rates, we know we're able to go up to 4K UHD at 30 frames per second, and in 1080p we can go up to 120 frames per second. We're not sure as to all the versions of that, if you're going to get 8-bit, 10-bit, internal, external, and then if that's going to be 420, 422, or something else. Another thing to keep in mind is this camera will automatically jump into Super 35 mode or a cropped mode when using non-full frame lenses. What remains to be seen is what the resolutions and all of that stuff is going to be at that crop, but I love that they have that included as an option. This camera also has a USB output, so similar to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, it looks like we'll be able to use external SSDs for recording options. We're not sure what we can record to those SSDs, but when you look at the images of this camera, you can clearly see that Sigma, for their promotional photos, has rigged it up with a Samsung T5, so it remains to be seen how Sigma uses this, but I'm really excited to see what they're going to do. There's other things you can do with this USB 3 connection. First, you can charge the camera, although you have to have it off, unfortunately. And then you can also use this USB connection to set up a live stream. So instead of using those stinking USB HDMI dongles that we've used for live streaming, you can simply plug this camera directly into your computer and you're off to the races. When it comes to internal recording, we have an SD card slot, and then there's also an HDMI out, a microphone in, but unfortunately no headphone jack, which is a real bummer. When it comes to dynamic range, Sigma is stating this camera will have 12.5 stops, and that remains to be seen what actually happens when we get these cameras out into the field. Going back to the form factor of this camera, it uses the L mount, and this makes perfect sense as Sigma, Leica, and Panasonic are in this L mount alliance. So they're going to be using that mount, which is amazing for people who enjoy adapting lenses, and you'll be able to really use anything from Sigma's line as well as Sigma's MC adapters to put pretty much any lens you want on this camera. There's no word on Embody Stabilization. It looks like it's just going to be electronic stabilization, so no Embody, which makes complete sense to me because of heat. That's a tiny camera to have full frame. Having IBIS would be insane. Another unfortunate note is going to be the fixed screen on the back of the camera. So there's no tilty, swivelly, there's no flip out. It's a fixed screen, so using a monitor is going to be very important on this camera. For power, the FP is going to be using Sigma's BP1, I believe, battery. It's really small, so my guess is you'll want to power it externally. You can use the USB to charge the battery that's in the camera, but the camera will need to be turned off, so you can't just use external power at this time. This camera also has a lot of great cinema features. First, if you look at the top of the camera, you'll notice there's a dedicated switch to go into cinema mode, and it looks like Sigma has paid a lot of attention to how information is displayed depending on which mode you're in. So it looks like when you switch between stills and cinema, you're going to have a completely different look on the camera, which is so appreciated. I'm really tired of these mirrorless hybrids where it just throws everything at you all of the time. When in cinema mode, you get a lot of cool features, including a true shutter degree angle, which is exciting. And then there's also some really impressive tools, including waveforms, as well as zebras, false color, and some other crazy ones, including this director's viewfinder mode, where you can essentially use this camera as a director's viewfinder. And here's a list of those cameras that are supported. So pretty impressive. You could just grab this thing, run out in the field, and you know, use it as a viewfinder. And finally, the camera does have timecode, which is handy for those who are going to need it. When it comes to the color profiles on this camera, there's a huge list from Sigma. It's good to see that we have a lot of options, but I haven't seen anything about log on this camera, which concerns me a little bit. I would expect, given that they're really going after cinema, that they will give us some kind of log setting on this camera. Maybe it's that cinema mode that is in that list, but it remains to be seen what log is going to look like, because that's hugely important as we enter into the world of HDR, just for film in general. And last but not least, when it comes to this new camera, there are a ton of accessories and mounts that Sigma is going to be releasing alongside the camera. Okay, so that's all we know about the camera. There are a bunch of question marks that still remain though, and I'm gonna run through those now. The first is going to be heat and overheating. This camera is minuscule, it's super duper small, and with a full frame camera and raw capabilities, it's going to be interesting to see how this thing performs heat wise. Now, there is a video that I'll link to in the description along with some other information about all of this stuff from Sigma talking about heat dissipation. And if you look at the photos of the camera, you'll notice that there are little fins all the way around it. And essentially Sigma has figured out a way to still have splash and dust proof body and sealing on the camera, but letting the heat sink, which is also internal, escape through these little external heat sinks. So check out that video, very interesting, but we do need to wait and see how this camera handles heat. Are we gonna have record limits? Is there going to be massive overheating issues? We'll have to wait and see. The next is the usual question marks involving bit depth, chroma, and all of that. So are we going to get 422 10-bit at all the modes? Are we going to be stuck with 8-bit in some, 420 in others? And then of course, when it comes to that crop into Super 35 mode, what are we going to see there? Are we still going to get full specs? Are we still going to get 4K? All that fun stuff, we don't know. Another huge question mark is going to be autofocus. Unfortunately, it looks like this camera is going to use contrast detection for its main autofocus mode, but we need to wait and see what it's going to look like. It does seem to have eye and face detection though, so hopefully we get better performance than what Panasonic is offering, but I'm not gonna go ahead and hope for that. I doubt it's going to happen, but you never know. We already talked about log. That's a big question mark. What kind of profile or log curve is Sigma going to be using? And then finally, color science. I personally have never used a Sigma camera, so I'm very curious to see what color science on the cinema side is going to look like. Are we going to be up there with kind of Fuji Canon? Or are we going to be in that more down there in Sony land? Remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful. Another question mark is going to be low light. And then of course, last but not least, the very last thing on this list is going to be, when is this camera coming out and how much is it going to cost? Both of those are unknown at this time. So hopefully we'll see it at the end of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at more April next year or something like that. And then the price is a tricky one for this camera. It's small. It doesn't look like it's got kind of the pro style body features that you would see on a $3,000 to $6,000 camera. So I would love to see this be at around the $3,000 mark. That said, it's really, really hard to tell. It could be maybe 25 to 3. That's kind of what I'm hoping. If it's less than that, that would be incredible. But with these features, I'm not sure that's going to happen. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Very last minute, but exciting stuff. I'm really loving seeing all these companies and new companies like Sigma get into the cinema/hybrid mirrorless camera space. And we're just going to see more and more competition. This and next year and the year after is going to be one of the most exciting times for video, because we're entering an era where almost all cameras have a log profile. All cameras are kind of looking into that raw space. We have high resolution. A lot of them have good autofocus. So it's a great time to be a filmmaker or somebody creating content, really. So that's going to wrap this one up. Links to everything will be in the description. If you enjoyed this video, maybe check out some of our camera guides. We'll probably have one for this new Sigma camera if it's good. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.